thank you everyone for coming. We are delighted to be here at COP30, as you said. Apologies for the slightly uncomfortable heat in the blue zone, but I am super privileged to introduce a very distinguished panel. Today we're going to be talking about a book project. I was talking about by co-editor Leonie and me have spent a few years putting together, and we've assembled everybody's chapter authors and archives who contributed to the work. The purpose of the book is to describe the state of the market with respect to carbon markets and technology. We all know that carbon markets have struggled for some time to get the scale and acceleration. We all know that they can achieve and they need to achieve. And we are believers here in the digital innovation pavilion. Thank you to our hosts every single end of it. We are believers in the power of innovative tech, AI, DLT, IoT, and many others to build the infrastructure behind the carbon markets. So what we wanted to do with this project is discuss the ways that innovation really bridge gaps that up until now have proved very challenging. I'd love to have we have on the stage several of our chapter authors who are going to give a short description of their work. But before we do that, I want to pass it over to my co-editor, Kevin, who will give a bit of a sense of how this project began and what we're trying to achieve more specifically.
Okay. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, John, so much for your kind introduction. So, so I would like to just quickly talk about the origin of this book. You know, it lies in simple but urgent observation across every region of the world. We have been hearing the same frustration. Carbon markets have enormous potential, but the trust needed to unlock the potential is still missing. So we try to address as much as we can in this book. And the book project actually began in 2023, you know, in the Dubai COP. And it's so interesting that, you know, we finally able to launch in the Berlin COP actually. And then some of the topics we covered in the book are used in the negotiation rooms, in project sites, and also in technical working groups. We keep encountering most of the questions because, you know, the chapters were written with practitioners. It's a practitioners for practitioners, basically, the registries to project developers, to something like a pilot class, you know, who extensively work with the data. So some of the main topics we covered in the overall book are how do we verify mitigation faster and more reliably, and how do we prevent double counting, and how do we ensure communities benefit, especially with reference to Kariba's project in Zimbabwe, you know, we're all aware about it, and how do we rebuild confidence after years of market fragmentation. So these conversations across continents, across sectors, across disciplines form the seed of this book. And the carbon and blockchain was not written in a single room, actually. It was shared in negotiations, in advisory work, in technology deployments, in legal perspective, in government consultations, and in the mid, experience of people trying to make climate markets work in the real world. And that is why I want to pause and recognize the extraordinary group of authors who contributed to it. Each of them brings a deep hands-on experience from blockchain, architecture, digital emerging, from legal to climate change. So I'm now happy to hand over the mic to Eva, who contributed to the data chapter. Eva, over to you. You want to talk about the chapter briefly. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Kalyani, for pulling this together and giving us a chance to celebrate the book. It's been a while since we had the first conversations, and we're really excited to bring it forward to the world. So my name is Yeba. I lead strategy and outreach at the Climate Action Data Trust. We are a global transparency platform based on the paper blockchain, and our job, as we see it, is to clean up and structure data that now exists in a variety of different registries, and bring it to the public to make it easier to use, so that we understand what's going on in terms of carbon crediting around the world, and help both countries comply with various reporting frameworks that are coming out from the DLT, COSIA, and others, as well as just improve the understanding of what's happening to communities of researchers who need this information. So obviously, we kind of sit at the intersection of blockchain, market, and policy, and that's the perspective I bring to the table. My excellent colleague Evan, these are all of our technical work. So I'll try to speak for the both of us because we co-authored the chapter. So trust uses blockchain in a very interesting way. So we employ a decentralized ledger because the aim is to build trust. Right now, at the state of the market is there are around 60 accrediting programs operating around the world. So we've all heard of their and the standard, but pretty much on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, we speak to innovators who have come up with something that is really exciting and tailored to their local circumstances, and they're bringing forward innovation. So, for example, a whole new CDR program based on leading science in India, or somebody in Houston, Texas, the US is not out of the game, figuring out how to regenerate and implement renewable or better agricultural practices. And so what we see is the proliferation of people doing their own thing. This market is decentralized, and that's fantastic. I think there should be more action taking place everywhere. But then the other side of that coin is that we still need to come together and see how all of our action rolls up to something coherent. And that's really hard to do if, one, you don't have a common data language, so a common standard on how do you essentially communicate about the work that you do. And then second, if you don't have a public reference point that everybody can trust. So we if you kind of tried looking for carbon data for different registries, everybody's doing roughly similar things, issuing credits based on specific methodologies, reporting the status and tracking that in the registry. Believe it or not, until we kind of started this work, the fields, the tables, and all the kind of structure of this data was pretty much up to the registry itself. There are no common data standards. So that's kind of one of the major contributions that we talk about in the chapter. It's like kind of the journey of getting everybody to speak the same language. But first about basic information, like who's issuing what credits, where, by whom, who's certified, what the status is. And then from there you can go on and empower applications such as global accounting identification, seeing how an independent crediting program project in Zimbabwe relates to the national registry, then relates to Zimbabwe's NBC and kind of support their capacity. So there's lots of rabbit holes we could go down into, but that's kind of the spirit behind that trust. And we use a decentralized ledger to ensure that every program in every country that's contributing to this mission stays in full control of the data and in full ownership, and they really send us a mirror that fulfills the public concerns requirements. That's my intro.
What is the key message I think you want to send over from your chapter?
I think we need systems to advance global action, and we need a common reference layer of trusted information. Without that, it's really hard to trust each other, and it's really hard to understand what's going on. And we see so much happening, and I think like my key message is, we should make it easier to discover and easier to trust these mechanisms that empower us to find action.
Over to Lincoln. Lincoln, you want to take those from the blockchain perspective, and what is that we should be from your chapter? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, and good afternoon to everyone. It's on this one. I just also want to give credit to the author behind this chapter, which is Siranda Misra, who unfortunately is unable to travel here because of the flight to Vietnam, and I'm here to say a few things in place of him. But on what Eva has just mentioned, I think that really strikes a chord with what we're trying to do, because the whole common language is very critical in terms of the communication. And over here, in terms of the blockchain chapter of your writing, most of the time we tend to think about blockchain being about fractionalization, immutability, and a means towards finance, because it is in the world of Bitcoin, and USDT. It's a little bit shady, but I don't think that's really what we should be thinking about. Because I think the beauty of blockchain, which was really the motivation for 013 after we won the best blockchain award at COP28, was to ensure that we had this whole linkage together, particularly at the solving level as well, because when we are talking about whether is it the VCM markets or Article 6, the essential problem that we are trying to solve here is provenance. And sometimes the data and the information in relation to provenance is there. But we've seen it, we've been involved in Article 6 transaction. Information is in sheets of Excel spreadsheets, we do that over WhatsApp, and somehow rather something scan that across to you. And those things are not totally linked up. Blockchain sews them up together. And one thing is that blockchain tracks everything in terms of from the start to the end. It is also something that documents well, and it's not just in the carbon markets as most of us would know, right? Traditionals over in banking, in trade, have been known to go into blockchain because they just got targeted the amount of information regarding due or needing letters of credit, invoices, and all these things to encapsulate properly within the whole blockchain function itself. But I'm going to go a little bit further because blockchain is also unlocking the potential in what we call the real world assets. Now, very often, and I think over the last couple of days, and in fact, the previous talks, we have heard the browsers from a lot of the project owners. Banks don't really understand what they are doing. Traditional finance are resistant towards funding this. And what do? We are actually working with countless scores of sovereign nations, really, because particularly on the South-South approach, many of the third world countries, global South, have the green assets. But it's not being monetized, it's not being deployed. And we are looking at blockchain. And it's not just us, I think there are others who are doing it as well, where they could digitize the assets, put it into a digital custody. We could then securitize this and then make this available on a fractional basis and to ensure that the whole climate finance there, hopefully, which is in trillions right now, I've lost count of it, to be bridged. And in fact, just to sort of end off and hand off to the distinguished speakers, is that we're no longer really looking at climate change finance or climate finance for that matter. In my view, we're looking at catastrophe climate finance. And I think this is what we really need to be aware of. And blockchain will be considered.
Thank you so much, Nathan. So definitely, I think the prospect of the blockchain will be seen in a different light, right? From this book, yeah. So, Ravi, do you want to say a few words as overall, perspective of it, and then I think go to Jonathan for the it's fine. Yeah. You want to go?
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So, firstly, we'd like to take congratulations to everyone involved in this work, Leonie, Jonathan. So, I'm actually in development agency where I've been on the carbon markets. And I think historically, from an African perspective, Africa's been left back in the carbon markets. Under the DLT protocol in the CDM, only 4% of global transactions originated from Africa. And I think this comes at a really fantastic time. With now Article 6 up and running, well, depends who you ask. This is a valuable tool for everyone across the carbon market ecosystem, especially for policymakers, to understand what is actually happening and give them, the trusted source of guidance of how to navigate the complexities of carbon markets. So yeah, keep it short and sweet, and congratulations again. And I look forward to sharing the work with all of the various counterparts we have in that community. So thank you.
John, you as a co-management of the book, and you have a bigger role to play. The book would be incomplete without the legal aspect. Forget about everything. There is no strong legal system in place. It's a blockchain, it's a carbon. I mean, it's just an opportunity to see chapter. Do you want to just take us through, you know, all the key points and, you know, what are the gaps and then how do you identify them? What are the key messages you would like to give to audience about the legal chapter? You and Catherine both. Yeah. Start with you.
Sure, happy to. And I should just give Catherine a fair warning that you know, she and I are book lawyers and spent a fair bit of time working on this chapter together, thinking through what the conceptual framework to be to describe how law and policy and regulation influences the direction of the capital markets, especially in the technology context. And so I'll pass the microphone to Catherine to kick it off. You know, our perspective was for this chapter, the carbon markets have struggled not only because of the absence of enabling technology or low demand price, it struggled with legal framework necessary to drive innovation and absent or just as problematic, have been fragmented to have numerous jurisdictions with different rules pertaining to market structure, recommend intellectual property protection, privacy. And we're dealing with the need for the establishment of digital that up until now have had no governance mechanisms. Right? And so if we're going to deploy AI, for example, blockchain tools, we're going to have to construct rapidly. And we're going to do expensive problems that never been blockchain has needed to immediately report, for example, the transaction data for carbon market sales. But in the process of doing that, you're also reporting tons of potentially privacy information, which can have, for example, GDPR consequences. So what we wanted to do is most of this focus towards the policy and climate side and the conversations that but to bring them together to look through the lens of legal governance and look at law as infrastructure. Sometimes there are academic debates, very few people are here that use this lens and want to use this lens and they feel confident. So people on the text and on the policy universe and other markets not really too advanced. These markets are accelerating. We're going to need to not only work on innovation development, but we have to talk to regulators, educate them on what tools can do, why they're more beneficial than potentially dangerous, and participate closely in the development of rules and policy frameworks that are purpose-built for these markets of the future, so they can grow without it. Catherine may or may not have more to add, but I'll pass it to her now and see if there's anything else she would like
this chapter with you. And actually, Jonathan has done so much like globally leading work on the legal side when it comes to blockchain. And so it was fun to think about this. I guess I would add, is the 30,000 perspective is that, in all of these next gen technologies and now gen technologies, there's a tendency to just run ahead. And we do need to make things happen quickly. But what we're finding is we end up slowing down because we haven't put in place the legal and policy frameworks to maximize impact and scale. So we're seeing bright spots, but they don't become, the new norm. And so I think that people like Jonathan, and myself too, I'm sort of focused on the disclosure side of this, but I really understand that we don't create new markets. The whole point of all these drivers is to create new markets, to create winners in the green transition. You don't make this happen without good data. DLT and blockchain are terrific. Use cases for that. But in order to do that, we've got to sit down with the regulator, sit down with this slow-moving legislators figure this out. So I'm excited to see that. I feel like the legal profession is getting more involved now from the corporate side because compliance and risk is there and it's real because we're doing the hard work to create pressure. And then because international lawyers are realizing this is a new market. What is it? Is it a block? Is carbon credit security of the commodity? And these are really important questions that have to be solved. And I feel that we're getting more of that buy-in. And and this chapter is an opportunity to highlight both soft law, the compliance drivers, which I think are going to give us an opportunity to get people to take us seriously. And then to look at some of this cross-border legal frameworks, which are going to be critical when it comes to capital markets and fulfilling the promises of the organization. So thanks for the opportunity to work with her. And Kamyani, thanks for your leadership on this book. I met her finally, and she was like, come on, let's go. So thank you so much.
Oh, just want to thank you again for your partnership on this chapter. You made a really great point. We're dealing now with multi-jurisdictional cross-border platform governance challenges in many domains. And so the EU leading the way with the DMA, the DSA, the IAC, every major digital platform has been forced to engage with these regulatory frameworks by a potentially great cost. And if we're not engaged at the beginning with regulators to build these regulatory frameworks in a way that enables rather than obstructs the innovation, we're going to hold back these markets, and these markets, as we all know, are going to be critical to achieving our climate objectives. And so, this book was meant to be explanatory on the one hand, but it was also meant to urge folks to move beyond that, as someone said, most of the regulatory apparatus is in the soft law context. You have these voluntary consensus standards that are promulgated and by NGO bodies and industry groups. At some point, you have to move beyond that and anchor these rules into regulatory text. And the hope is that as that occurs, the folks that also this panel have been deeply engaged both in these structured technologies as well as the carbon market, but to be deeply engaged in the rulemaking process from the start. So that's my hope and my hope behind my portion and this portion of the book. But of course, there's many others, and Al, of course, should be Karyani has written portion of the book as well. So back to you.
Thanks, Doctor, and thank you so much, John. It was like, I think it's a collective effort, not just me or you, but this things have been positive about everyone's efforts. My chapter, it actually talks about the ecosystem of the carbon market. It talks about carbon, but actually what it entails, what is the system? You're talking, you hear about DVDs, you hear about industries, and then you also talk about, the blockchain enabled, buyers and sellers kind of platforms, and the traders. I mean, there's so many stakeholders in this ecosystem. So I just, given a structure for that, the all over the undevastated graph. So given who are the buyers, who are the sellers, and who are the market mediators. So I talked about in general about how do you classify them and what do they do? What is their main role? And then some idea to the readers, when you enter the carbon markets, and that's how you identify, okay, these are the BBBs, these are the registries, these are the traders, and buyers and sellers. And then we also had a chapter on climate change in general, looking mostly from the global south perspective. And then we also talked about some examples from fund managers' perspective as well. I do a lot of work ESG from the corporate structure, the fund managers in India, global south. So when you engage your corporates, into these kind of talks like NDCs or carbon markets, I liaise with a very big corporates, currently who are looking into carbon offsets. So we were speaking to them to identify, understand how do they incorporate the nation level NDC goals into their corporate net zero goals. So we also talked some examples from the fund managers' perspective. Equity listed like a public equity versus we also brought in some fund managers who are like the proper venture capital private equity fund managers from India. who are running very big, massive, big funds, so they are looking into this carbon offsets and investing from their perspective. So we talk about the private, public, regulatory, and then also from the corporate perspective with examples. And I think this book actually talks more from the global South perspective. We've been very, I've been bit by asking that. Look, I come from India, and global South is very important for me. And my work is within Africa right now, so I managed to get a lot of material in those two chapters. So I'm sure you'll find it very interesting, when you read these, the first and second chapters of the book. Any comments, Eva, from your chapters?
I just want to reiterate what you said. I think like just building capacity and building these concepts of possible around and kind of, potentially selling as the next big thing and how that fits together is super, super important. So like I was involved with outside of this book with some of the work that the Joe Bankrupt convened on market infrastructure and kind of like laying out kind of the ecosystem governance and like some of the gaps that like still need to evolve, and like we contributed to the data system interoperability parts. So like that's another big resource to check out, of course. But the broader point is that we can only really build something that's globally effective in channeling finance if we bring up our collective understanding. And so it's, I think like the book touches on a lot of these different aspects. So obviously, what Catherine saying, we don't have a legal definition of what a carbon credit actually is. Like I sometimes think that all of our systems for doing carbon markets right this time are evolving kind of at the same time. You have Article 6 being negotiated, like hopefully at this point just the last piece being passed, but the pattern is in one place and it's in credits. Yeah, exactly. So we have kind of the global policy and kind of not regulation, but the structure, the framework of it together. We have a full-on digital revolution going on because a lot of the systems that were put in place for carbon markets 1.0 and 2.0 are out of date. And actually, a lot of digital pioneers are bringing in better and possibly more efficient ways of doing things. But then there are gaps in sometimes when you come from like a digital world, came from big tech into this thing, ideas of policy, you need to figure out how that then fits into like market structure and what actually is needed to assure trust. You build something digital, but an investor looks at it and goes like, who governs this thing? What is this thing? How do I, money is not going to flow. So it's really, I'm fascinated by the intersections that are implied and also explicitly teased out in the book. Like how do we build a global system that's decentralized, yes, but kind of runs on the same rules and agreed upon structures. It's also globally, globally interconnected, locally developed. Right? Like, are we talking about the same thing? Yeah, I sincerely hope that
So, one way to frame up the next question, I love our panelists to engage with me. We wrote this book to put its finger on the pulse on these different domains, technology, carbon markets, legal and policy frameworks. But we also intended it to be descriptive. We also intended it to be forward-looking. Right? So, what do we need to do? Where are we going? What are the obstacles? Sometimes Tanya and I discuss what the second volume of the book might look like. Right? If we're going to in a couple of years, what's what would the market look like? And I'd be curious to give each of our panelists or whoever would like to comment on it, what they imagine the next few years will hold with what we need to see in order for the status report that Volume 2 offers to be more positive than Volume 1.
I think the publication of the book would say you got a milestone from a educational perspective as well. Because if you look at the carbon markets, what's it's really start off at the moment understanding and what is the different components and how that comes across together. And if you look at the whole concept of education, very often we always know what we know.
and we try to reinforce that. But unfortunately, I think in this case here, for the common markets, for a lot of us, sometimes we actually do not know what we do not know, which is, I think, the incredible phenomenon. And why this is so important for the book to play its part in bringing everything together and to provide the different perspectives and the knowledge transfusion is because climate finance can be good in terms of the scale. When we look at the global capital markets itself, the bond market is hundreds of trillions of dollars. The money is there. The reason why money is not flowing into climate finance, or in this case, as I said, it's too late for climate financing, is prevention of climate catastrophe. It's because of the fact that very often the guardians or the fund, the family officers do not understand the language. There's a lack of, forgiveness, at least for them. And I think the book goes a long way in terms of addressing those things. I think going forward, I can see the book coming in future editions. I would really want to be part of those things. Yeah, because the whole dimension itself is going to evolve. It's not just perhaps about technology, because on at least on zero to eight side, at the 7Cs, as we know, by the end is that at the top of it is capital. With capital comes countries, with that comes companies as well. And then of course on the non-commercial side, there will be the communities, the children, the civil societies, and how those things come in, playing a part in the whole climate finance is still something that the average banker can't understand. Why do we need to make the communities happy? Why do we need to make sure that certain things are in place for Article 6 to be successful? I just want to know the IRR and get away with it. And I think that's the challenge that we need to address. And like I said, not only on the capital search front, but also on the communities, on the children, which is the future, the youth and the energy, and of course the role of the civil societies.
I'll be very brief because I've already spoken a lot, but I'd actually like to counter that a little bit. From various conversations that I've heard around here, we do have a momentum from people who do want to put money toward nature restoration, toward new models of sustainable living that protect the planet and then the communities. I think the challenges now are really around how do we do this thing? Kind of either how do we tweak our systems and calibrate them, or how we do kind of formalize the systems to like grow up investing. I mean that seems to be the conversation that we're having, and I see that as a fantastic thing because we're at the moment I'm talking to you data interoperability standards for different credits and like the legal definition and the like financing structures. And we moved a long way from just being just an idealistic project, and that's a good thing. That's growing pains for sure. But we do have businesses who do want to put money into nature to kind of take responsibility. What we need now is more evolution of the structural institutional guidance, and also for a strong signal for government and say this is a good thing. Every business should be taking responsibility, should be channeling money, and kind of encourage. So I mean, we do have some coalitions starting up. That's a good thing. And we will do our best. But yeah, that's kind of my the maturation is ongoing, and if we can contribute to accelerating it, then
These are the kinds of insights that you're trying to end the book. Maybe we could pivot to Catherine really briefly, and see if she'd like to give us some comments about where disclosure might be going in the next 18 months. Disclosure, yeah.
Okay, so short answer is that I would say we have a patchwork quilt of disclosure obligations. I think that digital infrastructure is even more important. Do I think that in total the disclosure drivers are enough to begin to change the market? Yes. Do I wish they were stronger? Yes. But I think, I don't look just at ISSB, CSRD, and my home state's contribution and California's disclosure laws, which is basically what I've been working on for 3 or 4 years. But once that happens, it's really where the markets that they're drivers for. And I really think that's where DLT, I'll just also say, really sings, which is let's look at markets where good data and provenance really matters, really creates markets and monetizes carbon or other natural capital. And I think that whether that's CBAM, I mean, I think, those are powerful drivers. I think, green finance is going to require investor grade data. We are having, explosion of ETS systems that will come online. I think generally going for compliance markets and places where the product's carbon footprint drives the market is to me where we make the greatest progress, because we have to actually show the markets that DOT actually gives you more confidence, makes markets work better, and it's not a sort of sideline weirdo thing that you do with your utopian. So I think that's where we do.
So with that, I think I want to do some closing lines before we go to the audience for Q&A. So this book is not a celebration of what carbon markets are. There's so much of carbon tokens everywhere around in the top 30. So I'm not talking just in general carbon, but it's a vision what they could do. So once you read this book, you come to understanding this is how it could be, this is where the path should be. And carbon markets where data is verifiable, and we try to send a message that the data is verifiable, as book reference to last chapter, where mitigation is real, market is financing is people, not just projects, and market where trust is not assumed, but it's earned. And then we wrote this book because climate markets stand at crossroads, and I still feel carbon is not much happening apart from the panels and within the COP30. We still need more action to be done, to make it actually actionable. And otherwise it could remain fragmented, mistrusted system that fails to deliver the scale of action we urgently need. I mean, you don't want under Kariba, right? We also covered what might happen with Kariba, what could be done to avoid that in order to the Kariba in the future. So our hope is that this book gives practitioners, negotiators, and innovators the tools and the courage to choose the first path. And I thank everyone for being here, for your leadership, and for believing that integrity is worth fighting for. Thank you so much, and open to audience for your questions. Thank you.
Here, back to Delphi. Oh, sorry. Right here. Okay. Hi, I'm back with Delphi. Lots of large corporates that have a really hard time bridging the gap between participating in carbon markets and fulfilling their disclosure obligations. And you mentioned earlier carbon footprint driven markets being key to moving forward in that space. One of the things we've seen in the course of years when it comes to Scope 3 emissions reporting, it's great when you have that data to bring product carbon footprint into your Scope 3 calculations, but that's just a small fraction of your overall purchased goods footprint. And the logic for that to other methods of emissions calculations is a huge stumbling block for these corporates. How do you foresee overcoming that hurdle? Move past that and it's much more this artful scale, which is way more monetized than top-down corporate GHG emissions.
Anybody else want to take America? This is such a salient conversation, and I'm part of the GHG protocol's technical working group on the corporate standard. And so this is a real question that corporates have, which is we recognize that product carbon footprints are a way for them in a sea of carbon. Let's be real. A lot of this is like they've got an iceberg of carbon in Scope 3, so that is not a good story. So what's a good story is like Apple's, carbon zero watch. We can't really tell the sort of slippery, so I'm fine with that. Now I will admit the GHG protocol does not create a space for product carbon footprints. I will say this, if you have all your product carbon footprints for your entire, your whole inventory, that does roll up to an inventory. So I think it does, we can use better data, but does it drive that data? No, and I think what we have to recognize is the GHG protocol is like the on-ramp onto like, I don't know, whatever big freeway you are on, it's like undergrad. Like it's not a grad school thing. You're gonna have, and if we're gonna move, and DLT is not gonna get driven by the GHG protocol. That doesn't mean it's not important, and I'm a both-end person, which is, I think corporates would not even be talking about these things if there wasn't some transparency and some like reckoning that would go, and we are not in an e-liabilities world, we're not in a carbon-based budgeting world. I'd love that. We should get that to happen, but that saying we're gonna wait for that means like we're losing way too much time. But I hear you on the product carbon footprint piece, but that doesn't mean that, that's where DLT comes in handy, right? Like, and there's a lot of reputational risk right now in this space. So I don't think it's not just disclosure, it's legal, it's reputational, and it's commercial.
Any other questions? Thank you. My name is Harry. I'm from Nigeria. And this conversation is so very interesting, especially for us in the global south. And when I see the topic, standardizing the market and improving transparency and traceability with AI, DLT, and IoT. And in my head, I'm like, we are the people. And when I say the people, because in between transparency and traceability is trust. And people are the ones getting trust. So now, my question is, within conversation with the capital market, is there a part that speaks to product pricing and the uniformity of pricing irrespective of jurisdiction? Because that helps with trust. That's one. And two, there's a big conversation around taxonomy because kind of cost a bumpy road with respect to disclosure. How does this taxonomy play a very key role with standardizing carbon market based on what you do with the Thank you for the question. Anyone want to respond?
On the taxonomy part, that's taxonomy can mean different things. I'm going to address it first from carbon credit, standardizing data on the carbon credits, because that's my world that I know a lot about. I think it's really boring to be going over data tables and saying, how do we structure, that this project sits under this type of program and it corresponds to this sector, and in this disclosure framework sectors are, it's a list of 20, and this other disclosure framework is this other list of 5, 15 maybe. Which one do we choose? Like country drop down list, like then like if you wanted to answer a simple question like, okay, how many credits did company X retire last year? It's really hard to find out even the basics because one, well, it's not mandatory to disclose, and there aren't kind of rules around what should be disclosed. Then on a practical level, even if a company does choose to disclose, okay, I retired something from some credits, there's not a wide kind of widely accepted standard of how the company name should be disclosed. So it could exist in like 3 different formats. Like Google could be the Twitter acronym, it could be Google, it could be the intermediary that did this on behalf of Google. And you're like, okay, like we have a field that says this, but it's a mess. So as boring as it sounds, data standards and taxonomies are really key to make sure that we can get comparable data across programs, across jurisdictions, and then we can start mandating the disclosure of said data. So there's been a huge momentum this year for data standardization. We started our efforts, as I said, around the key fields that would help identify carbon projects, key stakeholders involved in them, where they're issued by whom, been verified, where they're eligible, and status. A couple of years ago, now we have 11 registries connected to our platform reporting their data around that standard. And then this year, several efforts, including the G20 effort led by South Africa, which we consulted on the technical front, as well as kind of industry-led bottom-up initiatives, the Carbon Data Open Protocol, and the ISO got involved in trying to see, okay, what standards are already kind of being used by the market, and what's really mandatory and could help drive the cross-border transparency, comparability, and integrity questions. And we've kind of been across all of them, saying, here's what we learned over 3 years implementing this on 90% of existing market data, and here's how that could be improved. And there's a big move to push that and to drive toward coherence, and I think that will lay the foundation for both regulatory oversight and mandatory disclosures, and like at the end of the day, trust, because you can actually look up what's happening across different places and make informed choices, including your own pricing.
In the interest of time, I'm going to take one more question. The first one. Why don't we discuss the asset pricing and the so is there any few more questions? First, the gentleman in the back.
Listening to the conversation, I'm wondering, are we maybe trying to standardize the wrong thing? Because carbon emissions are not very intuitive to people, right? And so we're trying to sell some number. What's the point of carbon? What's a kilogram of carbon? Like, it doesn't really mean much to people. And of course, we're in a climate emergency. We have to sort out this mess we're in. And the big ingredient is, of course, fossil fuels. So, working on establishing a standard for fossil-free products where you get visibility on the supply chain, and a company that uses only clean energy, no fossil fuels, can say this is a fossil-free product. And there's some legs of the supply chain are fossil fuel, those don't count towards the fossil-free, and so then it's a partially fossil-free product, and you have a percentage, there's transparency mandated in the standard about how much that is. And I'm wondering whether that could be a shortcut that eliminates many of the worries that we're having in trying to explain, trying to get people to understand how this all works, what it means, and push them to actually do it. And that could be a contribution we're working on. We haven't got much pick up yet, but it could be an option.
Thanks very much for the questions. I think we look at it from a asset pricing perspective, because the reason why we have the need to align those things, I think it's important, because for investors to come in, there is a need for them to be cognizant of what are the different types of carbon credits. Because carbon credit as an asset class, which we call it as investable, has not reached that stage at the moment. Partly because there's variety. BCM today are talking about cents, and then you have the CDR, which are talking about hundreds of dollars. And I don't think that's a problem, because from a blockchain perspective, we're happy we will be able to amass all of them and tokenize them as an underlying asset. But that's another solution. But the key thing, of course, is that we need to be able to address the different types of carbon credits. And that comes with taxonomy, clearing process, but it's something that we can't just push away. And the different asset class that we just explained clearly is because you look at commodities, you look at gold, the 4-carat, brand foods, sweet brand food, whatever types of classifications that are easy to write and measure. And I think that's where we need to reach them in that sense.
Right, last question. Nothing. Maybe two. Sorry. Thank you for contributing to standardize this market. Question with regard to mentioned during the talk is about good data. And this is definitely the only field that can make AI work. We actually doesn't care about the data, and even IoT can produce small data. So my question is, what is like the data governance framework that can give you some approach and also the safeguards that you're looking at? What is the key of your safeguard? Benchmark. What financial ability?
Actually, a question I'm not entirely sure the answer to, but that's a really, really important point. Essentially, yes, like whether you're talking about making investment decisions or building a model to analyze anything, or the same, the same rule applies. We know garbage in, garbage out. Right? Anybody, especially with the proliferation of LLMs, could like draw and a great PDD, then you could deploy an AI on top of it to extract the value, and it's just like you end up posting or posting or posting. I think this is really where this is the personal view, and that's also kind of how we approach things at Dev Trust. I think the technology and the innovation side can really show what's possible, but then really it should contribute to the market maturation efforts, and we get regulators and government involved and say what's actually really important and what carries. Where are the sticks? If you get this wrong, if you try to feed that data into the system, what happens? And this is where I think we carry the responsibility of most of us are, some edge of innovation, digital, legal or otherwise, to balance those risks and responsibilities so that we don't do digital for digital, we do digital with rules that can then build trust in the market. And I think that's where I would see it being the scope of governments or international regulators. Like we have accounting standards run by the ICC and kind of I think the last 5 years where it went from like being a not-for-profit driven thing, fragmented initiatives, and then matured to being included in mainstream financial frameworks that every company has to follow. And I think carbon should follow that same pathway. So we should all contribute to identifying what's really important to disclose, how we extract that information and we can then
I'll just add on a little bit of that. I used to work in Experian, which is a largest credit bureau. I think there are safeguards and governance. ISO 27001, 27002 will be one of them. A lot of technologies, data centers hold themselves to the highest standards, and I think that could be one way of ensuring that we don't get a garbage in, garbage out problem. ISO 27000.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone, thank you very much for allowing me. I'm sorry I'm dragging this. Well, my question is directed at you. So we talked about tokenization and the goals of standardizing carbon markets. Now, I come from Nigeria as well, the global south, and we have huge things, right? But we still have to standardize for so many years. One being data, and two being the standardization interest. Like South Africa prepared for carbon tax, Nigeria just did its framework for carbon markets as well. Now, if that already is happening, isn't tokenization even going to be higher? That's one. Two is on confidence. The financial market, the traditional financial markets for the global south, let me use Nigeria as a case study. Already we don't have 100% confidence from investors, both institutional and private. We know this.
And also with these things happening with the global price, the whole volatility and whatever. So we are talking about double lack of confidence. How, how will this work for countries like mine?
Okay. I'll try my best to answer that as much as possible. Very good questions. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I don't think tokenization is going to be a cure all. That's not something that it will be. It's not a magic wand. I think tokenization provides a bridge, and there are options away from what we call traditional finance. I think some of the things that we talk about, that were mentioned by you, is essentially about the lack of confidence, trust, lack of information, which is already impacting on traditional finance. Now, tokenization can solve part of that. Right? Case in point is because of the fact that within things we take talk about immutability, tokenization, it gives a good tracks and gives a good record of everything. But I think the important thing is also the DeFi space and the tokenization is also a lead-in from a group of liquidity or core liquidity, which is quite starved of real assets or what we call real world assets. And you can see a lot of the crypto space itself, and back to your point, Bitcoin, there isn't any underlying asset at all. And it's still above $100,000 today. I'm not saying that it will go further. I'm not saying it's going to crash. I really wanted to answer. But I think what tokenization can offer is a layer of underlying asset which has never happened before in the cryptocurrency space. And I think that's what we would like to believe, that it could be a path towards the greater possibility of unlocking and transitioning some of the pool of investable funds, which used to be thinking that buying an image of Donald Trump is going to make them tons of money. Now, I'm sure that you look at it, and look at the forest, and look at the agriculture, because tokenization don't just work on money credits, you can tokenize the future crop yield and make it look like the lending instrument. And we're not the only one doing that. I think there are companies like Meta, for example, the issuer of USDT, are looking to come in and take on these assets and finance it. And back to the last question about trust, I think it is about transparency. Trust comes about through greater transparency. I'm not saying that TradFi is not transparent, but certainly I think that what we're saying, blockchain, what trust is doing, illustrating the retirement very clearly, because everything is captured on blockchain. Just like we seeing the assets beneath the blockchain itself, I think we're going somewhere in building the trust, but it doesn't come overnight, of course.
So with this, we end this panel, and can I please request a big round of applause for my panelists, and thanks everyone for your questions. You're all available for any extra questions if you have. Thank you so much.